I sat behind the security desk at my university library, holding an envelope that I assumed was meant for me. "To the new guy" was scrawled on the front in jagged script, and I supposed I was the recipient because it didn't get any more new than I was last night. I was scheduled to work my first nighttime shift, 12 to 4 a.m., at my university library. The hours didn't deter me at all. I'm a serial insomniac, and my class schedule was structured so I could stay up late and sleep in the next day. This luxury had the unfortunate side effect of limiting my employment options, and in order to stay somewhat afloat in the sea of student debt I was floundering in, I couldn't afford to remain unemployed. When I heard about the night shift at the library from my friend Valerie, who I attended high school with, it seemed like a perfect match. I can't reveal the specific school that I work for, but suffice to say it's a large university in the southern portion of the United States. Anyway, Val worked the early morning shift, 6 to 10, and she mentioned that the guy who worked the late night shift, some guy named Flanders, had quit a few days prior. When she told me the hours and confirmed that the pay was at least north of minimum wage, I jumped at the opportunity. After spending a week slogging through the 3 departments you have to send paperwork to in order to become an official university employee, my bank account was in desperate need of that first payday. So anyway, last night was my inaugural shift, and it being a Friday night, the library was expectedly dead at midnight when I relieved my new colleague Tori from her post. The employment manuals I was required to read had prepared me extensively for what was by all indications going to be a mundane 4 hours. I started at the security base, a big wooden desk the size of a tank underneath a huge glass window embossed with our university sigil in the library atrium. Here I would stay for the first 30 minutes of my shift and perform some clerical tasks like checking the book detectors and ensuring the patron counter worked correctly. After those first 30 minutes, I was supposed to make my rounds about the library, an inconceivably large building that, according to the employment manual, required about 2 miles of walking to complete a perimeter sweep on all 4 floors. When I settled into my chair behind the behemoth desk, I was exasperated to find the letter. Oh great, I thought. More useless protocols to read. I tore open the envelope to find a sheet of yellow legal paper with numbered lines, following a paragraph of writing in the same style as the print on the outside of the envelope. Dear new guy, do not throw away this list under any circumstances. This is your Bible, your map, and your survival guide all in one succinct document. I didn't have to leave this for you, but my hope is that by leaving this behind, I'll help to curtail your learning curve a bit. Lord knows it can be a steep one. Anyway, the rules listed in this document are not optional. They aren't suggestions, and they aren't advice. They are a code that you must adhere to, or some terrible things can happen. You wouldn't understand without experiencing it for yourself, which is exactly what this letter is meant to avoid, so listen up. If you get through this first night, I'll leave more rules for you tomorrow. Rule number 1. Never look at the hallway safety mirrors in the basement corridor. Keep your eyes low and walk swiftly. Rule number 2. You will encounter an unfathomably tall man in a gray suit. Do not look at his face. Answer any question he asks you with "No, sir," and he will go away. Rule number 3. Stay out of the atrium from 2:15 to 2:16 every night. It's better if you don't see it. Rule number 4. You will hear some horrible sounds from study room 219J on occasion. Don't ever open the door. Rule number 5. Always walk beside the bookshelves in the west portion of the 4th floor, never between them. Rule number 6. If you hear tapping coming from the glass window behind you at the security desk, do not turn around. Rule number 7. At 12:15, you'll see a heavy man in a tweed suit hurry past you clutching his briefcase. When you see him walk past you, tell him, "Today is not the day, friend." He'll look relieved, nod, and walk out of the library. If he gets up the stairs, you're already too late. I was so caught up in reading the letter that I had forgotten to check the student ID of the person who had just rushed by the security desk. I remembered the protocol with a jolt and looked up to call out to the offending student just in time to watch a man, clad in a tweed suit, clear the stairs and slip out of sight onto the library floor. Let me know if you need further edits or adjustments. Oh no, I blurted out. The heavy man in the tweed suit had just been lost from view, now on the second floor of the library. I didn't know for sure if these rules were legit or some dumb prank on the new guy, but the specificity of the letter and its urgent tone wasn't lost on me. I slipped out from behind the security desk and started up the stairs after the tweed-clad mystery man. I didn't mention in my previous letter, but the library is closed from 1 to 6 a.m. to students of the university, and really anyone besides me for that matter. I knew there were a few Chinese exchange students milling around the third floor, but I didn't see anyone on the second floor earlier as I was walking in. That should make a portly gentleman in an all-tweed suit stick out like a sore thumb, I reasoned. But as I peered over the stairs, expecting some unsettling visual, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. These guys are messing with me, I thought, but it can't hurt to check around for the dude. After all, the employment manual made it clear that the library was closed to the general public at 10 p.m., and anyone wishing to gain entry to the library after that time needed to present a valid student ID, and this dude didn't exactly fit the typical demographic. The second floor is mostly comprised of open space. Computer labs, printer stations, and study desks littered the floor plan. But there was a section of bookshelves in the northeast corner. It's our government original document section, and incidentally, one of the more expensive collections at the library. Since I didn't see the man anywhere in the exposed vicinity, I was left to assume that he had taken refuge in the book stacks. I groaned and started walking in that direction. When I approached, I heard some shuffling coming from behind one of the book stacks that sounded like a mini tornado was ripping through paper. I whipped around the corner and saw the man yanking books and sheets of paper off of the shelves and frantically flipping through them. "Hey, what are you doing, man?" I yelled at him. In an instant, he wheeled around to face me, his face red and eyes wild, with thick droplets of sweat trickling off his cheeks. He looked like a wild animal backed into a corner. "Oh no, Stay back!" the man screamed at me, thrusting his briefcase in my direction. "Oh, come on, dude. Are you going to hit me with a briefcase?" I asked, laughing. I'm 6 feet 5 inches and well north of 220 pounds. And this guy couldn't have been over 5 feet 2 inches. I was starting to get annoyed that he was throwing a wrench into my first night on the job. The guy looked at me incredulously for a moment and said, "Oh, right," then cracked open his briefcase, reached inside, and withdrew a small, compact black revolver. "Oh," I said stupidly. 15 minutes into the shift at a library, and already I was held at gunpoint. "Look, man, just settle down for a second. No one needs to get hurt. Just put the gun down and tell me what you're looking for, and we'll find it together," I pleaded. "Not a chance," the man sneered. "You people want to ruin my name? I won't have it, do you hear me? If only I had a little more time." The man looked fraught with stress as he tightened his grip on the trigger and leveled it at me. I squeezed my eyes shut for what felt like a month and a half before peeking out again to see the man with the pistol at his side, head hung low. A wave of relief swept through me. "Okay, man, let me help you. We'll walk out of here together and figure this thing out." The man looked up at me, dejected, and met my eyes. "Oh no," he said. "There's only one way out." In one swift motion, he lifted the pistol to his right temple, exhaled, and pulled the trigger. An eardrum-shattering bang bombarded my ears as the bullet ripped through his right temple and exploded out the left side of his head, coating the bookshelf to his left in a thick sheet of crimson blood and pink flesh. His body hit the floor violently, his hand releasing its grip on the gun, sending it skidding across the floor. "No!" I screamed as I watched the carnage before me. The man lay there, impossible amounts of blood gushing from a softball-sized hole in the side of his skull that soaked the mound of shredded documents he had collapsed on. I backed away shakily, transfixed by the scene in front of me. "What is going on?" A Chinese exchange student with a blue sweater vest approached me from my left, clearly furious. "No! Stay back!" I yelled at him. A few more steps, and he would be within view of the bloody mess in the recesses of the bookshelves. "You are being so loud while we study," he proclaimed as he stomped over and stood toe-to-toe with me. "Please, I need you to step back. A man just committed suicide. I need to call the police," I pleaded. I glanced over at the digital readout on the clock near the computer at the security desk. It read 0041. About 20 minutes to go until the straggling students would have to vacate the library, leaving me alone for 3 hours. I scoured the paper, reading and rereading the rules. I had already violated number 7, but even though that experience was certainly jarring, it didn't appear to have created any lasting damage. I surveyed the government original documents section at length and couldn't find any sign that a man had just committed a terrible act. Maybe the author of the letter intended for me to start my shift with an infraction. It definitely got my attention and, thankfully, didn't seem to have any lingering consequences. Well, apart from the lingering unease in my mind. My thoughts were interrupted by a chime through the PA system. Dotting. "Attention library patrons. The library will be closing in 10 minutes. The library will be closing in 10 minutes. Please make your final selections and exit the library. Have a good night." The last few students that were holed up in the third-floor study area walked down the stairs, past me, and out the door. "Have a splendid evening, my good man." I do apologize for my earlier rudeness. It was not intended to be an insult to your character. You seem like a fine gentleman. The Chinese exchange student from my previous encounter said as he tipped his top hat and exited through the main set of doors with his friends. That was surprisingly eloquent. With the holdouts having all trickled out, I was all alone in the massive building. Or so I hoped. I took a shaky breath and walked away from the desk to begin my first perimeter sweep of the library. I started in the basement. The basement has a network of corridors that are not used by students or the general public and are mostly only frequented by library staff. These hallways form a complex labyrinth that I certainly hadn't mastered yet. The sharp, biting angles had hallway safety mirrors placed at the corners to prevent collisions. I knew they had saved me from bumping into another staff member a few times earlier that evening. I approached the first sharp turn, and my eyes instinctively gravitated upward. The letter's advice came back to me just in time. Rule number 1, never look at the hallway safety mirrors in the basement corridor. Keep your eyes low and walk swiftly. I averted my gaze, turned the corner briskly, and nothing. The hallway was empty. No big deal, I thought. I continued walking deeper into the heart of the basement. Some important background information about this level. Most library staff will never actually see the majority of the floor. The staff hallways exist on the periphery of a massive area closed off to all but the most privileged security personnel. This section belonged to the State Historical Society and was heavily secured. No one I knew had ever entered it. I had just finished my perimeter sweep and was about to turn back toward the stairs when I heard deep, ragged breathing from around the corner. "Hello?" I called out reflexively. There was no response, just the continued deep, uneven breaths. I was stuck. I had to walk past that hallway to exit the maze of corridors. The temptation to just glance at the mirror above the turn was immense. Why walk into something unknown when I could simply see it first? But I had promised myself to follow the rules, and I had already seen the consequences of disobedience firsthand. I took a deep breath and stepped around the corner, eyes shut and head down. I stood there for a moment, afraid to look up. When I finally did, the hallway was empty, nothing out of place. Whatever had been making those noises was gone. That was a point in favor of following the rules. Hastily, I made my way back to the stairs and ascended to the second floor, eager to leave the cramped basement behind. My sweep of the second floor was much less eventful, completed in about 20 minutes without incident. The third floor was just as quiet, apart from a bat flying over my head and nearly making me jump out of my skin. I was getting ready to head up to the fourth floor when I heard the sound of the main doors opening 2 floors below. That was impossible. The doors had been locked for nearly an hour. Hesitantly, I crept down the stairs. ears straining for any movement. When I reached the last flight of stairs that opened into the atrium, I stopped abruptly. 2 gray poles stood at the foot of the stairs. But as my mind caught up with my vision, I realized those weren't poles. They were legs, long, slender legs. From my vantage point, I could see up to about chest height of whatever was standing at the bottom. A chill shot through my spine. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering. Then a voice, deep, resonant, shaking the air itself. "I know that you are up there." My breath caught in my throat. The man spoke quietly, yet his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Are you afraid?" he asked. I forced myself to recall the rules. Answer any question he asked with, "No, sir," and he will leave. "No, sir," I managed to say. "Then you must be foolish." "Are you foolish?" The voice darkened, menace creeping into its tone. "No, sir," I answered, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Would you like to see my face?" "No, sir." A long silence followed. Blood had begun to stain the upper reaches of his gray suit, turning it a deep crimson. Thick, wet drops rolled off his sleeves, past his long, bony fingers, splattering onto the linoleum. Then, without another word, the man turned and strolled away. I checked my watch. 3:03 a.m. I glanced over at the digital readout on the clock near the computer at the security desk. It read 0041. About 20 minutes to go until the straggling students would have to vacate the library, leaving me alone for 3 hours. I scoured the paper, reading and rereading the rules. I had already violated number 7, but even though that experience was certainly jarring, it didn't appear to have created any lasting damage. I surveyed the government original documents section at length and couldn't find any sign that a man had just committed a terrible act. Maybe the author of the letter intended for me to start my shift with an infraction. It definitely got my attention and, thankfully, didn't seem to have any lingering consequences. Well, apart from the lingering unease in my mind. My thoughts were interrupted by a chime through the PA system. Dotting. "Attention library patrons. The library will be closing in 10 minutes. The library will be closing in 10 minutes. Please make your final selections and exit the library. Have a good night." The last few students that were holed up in the 3rd floor study area walked down the stairs, past me and out the door. "Have a splendid evening, my good man. I do apologize for my earlier rudeness. It was not intended to be an insult to your character. You seem like a fine gentleman," the Chinese exchange student from my previous encounter said as he tipped his top hat and exited through the main set of doors with his friends. That was surprisingly eloquent. With the holdouts having all trickled out, I was all alone in the massive building, or so I hoped. I took a shaky breath and walked away from the desk to begin my first perimeter sweep of the library. I started in the basement. The basement has a network of corridors that are not used by students or the general public, and are mostly only frequented by library staff. These hallways form a complex labyrinth that I certainly hadn't mastered yet. The sharp, biting angles had hallway safety mirrors placed at the corners to prevent collisions. I knew they had saved me from bumping into another staff member a few times earlier that evening. I approached the first sharp turn, and my eyes instinctively gravitated upward. The letter's advice came back to me just in time. Rule number 1, never look at the hallway safety mirrors in the basement corridor. Keep your eyes low and walk swiftly. I averted my gaze, turned the corner briskly, and nothing. The hallway was empty. No big deal, I thought. I continued walking deeper into the heart of the basement. Some important background information about this level. Most library staff will never actually see the majority of the floor. The staff hallways exist on the periphery of a massive area, closed off to all but the most privileged security personnel. This section belonged to the State Historical Society and was heavily secured. No one I knew had ever entered it. I had just finished my perimeter sweep and was about to turn back toward the stairs when I heard deep, ragged breathing from around the corner. "Hello?" I called out reflexively. There was no response, just the continued deep, uneven breaths. I was stuck. I had to walk past that hallway to exit the maze of corridors. The temptation to just glance at the mirror above the turn was immense. Why walk into something unknown when I could simply see it first? But I'd promised myself to follow the rules, and I had already seen the consequences of disobedience firsthand. I took a deep breath and stepped around the corner, eyes shut and head down. I stood there for a moment, afraid to look up. When I finally did, the hallway was empty. Nothing out of place. Whatever had been making those noises was gone. That was a point in favor of following the rules. Hastily, I made my way back to the stairs and ascended to the second floor, eager to leave the cramped basement behind. My sweep of the second floor was much less eventful, completed in about 20 minutes without incident. The third floor was just as quiet, apart from a bat flying over my head and nearly making me jump out of my skin. I was getting ready to head up to the fourth floor when I heard the sound of the main doors opening 2 floors below. That was impossible. The doors had been locked for nearly an hour. Hesitantly, I crept down the stairs, ears straining for any movement. When I reached the last flight of stairs that opened into the atrium, I stopped abruptly. 2 gray poles stood at the foot of the stairs, but as my mind caught up with my vision, I realized those weren't poles. They were legs. Long, slender legs. From my vantage point, I could see up to about chest height of whatever was standing at the bottom. A chill shot through my spine. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering. Then, a voice. Deep, resonant, shaking the air itself. I know that you're up there. My breath caught in my throat. The man spoke quietly, yet his voice rumbled like distant thunder. Are you afraid? He asked. I forced myself to recall the rules. Answer any question he asks with no, sir, and he will leave. No, sir, I managed to say. Then you must be foolish. Are you foolish? The voice darkened, menace creeping into its tone. No, sir, I answered, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Would you like to see my face? No, sir. A long silence followed. Blood had begun to stain the upper reaches of his gray suit, turning it a deep crimson. Thick, wet drops rolled off his sleeves, past his long, bony fingers, splattering onto the linoleum. Then, without another word, the man turned and strolled away. I checked my watch. 3:03 a.m. The rest of my shift passed in a haze, my mind reeling from the night's events. When dawn finally broke, I stepped outside, breathing in the cool morning air. The library stood behind me, silent once more. But I knew the horrors within still lurked, waiting for the next poor soul to take my place. As I walked away, one thought haunted me. What would happen if I ever broke the rules again? The dim glow of the fluorescent lights buzzed softly in the empty convenience store. It was 11:45 p.m., and Eric had just clocked in for his usual night shift. He had worked here for almost a year, and while it wasn't the most exciting job, it paid the bills. The store was located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by nothing but endless roads and an old gas station across the street that had been abandoned for decades. He sighed, leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone. The security cameras displayed the outside lot, which was empty except for a single, flickering streetlight, casting eerie shadows. The night always carried a strange stillness, one that made Eric feel as if he was being watched. He brushed the feeling aside. It was just another long, boring shift. At exactly midnight, the door chime rang. Eric looked up to see a man standing at the entrance. He wore a long brown coat, his head slightly tilted down so that his face was barely visible. The man didn't move for a moment, just stood there. The air in the store suddenly felt colder. Welcome, Eric said hesitantly. The man finally stepped inside, walking slowly down one of the aisles. Eric watched him through the security mirrors, but the moment the man turned the corner, he was gone. Vanished. Confused, Eric left the counter and walked over, peeking down the aisles. Empty. A chill ran down his spine. There was no way he could have left without triggering the door chime. As he turned back toward the counter, the radio behind him crackled with static. The store's radio had been broken for months, yet now it played a distorted whisper. Help me. Eric's breath hitched. His fingers trembled as he reached for the volume knob, but before he could touch it, the voice spoke again. "Turn around." He spun, heart hammering, but there was no one there. The store was empty. The static cut out, leaving an unsettling silence. He forced a nervous chuckle. "Just my imagination," he muttered. At 1:15 a.m., a flickering movement on the security monitor caught his attention. He squinted at the screen. In camera 3, the one overlooking the empty gas station across the street, a shadow shifted. The abandoned station had been closed for over 20 years. No one ever went there. Yet something moved in the darkness. The shadow stretched unnaturally long, as if it had no real form. It slithered along the ground before disappearing behind the station's boarded-up entrance. Eric felt the cold sweat gathering at the back of his neck. His phone buzzed. A new message. "Unknown number. Don't look away." His hands shook as he quickly turned the phone off. He couldn't do this. Maybe it was just a prank. Maybe he was just overtired. Maybe... The store's automatic doors suddenly slid open with a loud hiss. But no one was there. Eric's breathing turned shallow. He slowly approached the doorway, peering outside. The street was empty. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. Then, from behind him, he heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, right behind him. He spun around, fists clenched, but again, nothing. The aisles were empty. The only thing that had changed was the freezer door. It was wide open. Foggy, cold air spilled out, pooling onto the tiled floor. With dread twisting in his gut, Eric stepped closer. He peered inside. Among the rows of frozen dinners and ice cream tubs, something stood at the very back. A figure. Pale, almost translucent. Its mouth stretched too wide, eyes hollow and unblinking. Its fingers, long and skeletal, twitched. Then, in a raspy whisper, it spoke. "Your shift is almost over, Eric." Eric stumbled backward, slamming the freezer door shut. His heart pounded like a war drum. He raced to the counter, grabbing his phone, but when he looked at the screen, the time read 11:45 p.m. His shift had just begun. A sinking dread settled in his stomach. He checked the wall clock. The hands hadn't moved. They were stuck. He looked back at the cameras. The footage was looping, playing the same moment over and over again. He was trapped. The door chime rang again. Slowly, he turned to see the same man from before. Same coat. Same downward gaze. Eric wanted to scream, wanted to run, but he couldn't move. The figure lifted his head this time, revealing a face that looked exactly like Eric's. "Your shift is almost over," the doppelganger whispered with a grin. The lights flickered. The store went dark. Eric felt himself being pulled into the blackness, an unseen force dragging him into an abyss. His screams echoed in the void, fading as the world around him dissolved. Then, silence. When Eric opened his eyes, he was standing at the counter, phone in hand, the security monitors buzzing softly. The clock read 11:45 p.m. The door chime rang. The man in the brown coat stepped inside. Again, and again, and again. Eric was stuck in an endless loop. A night shift that would never end, a nightmare he could never escape. No matter how many times he ran, fought, or screamed, it always reset. And outside, in the darkness beyond the gas station, the shadow watched, waiting. The night shift at the old hospital was never easy. Mark had been working here for 3 years, but something about tonight felt wrong. The halls of St. Augustine's Medical Center stretched endlessly before him, dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights. The building had been partially abandoned for years, with only the emergency wing still in operation. The rest of the hospital was a ghost town. It was a quiet night. Too quiet. Mark sat at the reception desk, flipping through a worn-out magazine. His partner for the night, Lisa, had gone to check on a patient and hadn't returned for over 20 minutes. He picked up his radio. "Lisa, you there?" Static. He frowned. The radios never worked properly in this place. Maybe the thick walls messed with the signal. Still, he felt a pit form in his stomach. A sound echoed through the hall. a slow, dragging sound. Mark stood up, peering down the corridor. The dim emergency lights cast eerie shadows on the cracked walls. He grabbed his flashlight and started walking, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. At the end of the hallway, a door was slightly ajar. The old surgical ward. Nobody had been in there for years. The city had shut it down after an accident decades ago. He hesitated, then pushed the door open. The room was freezing. Old surgical tables were covered in dusty white sheets. The air smelled of disinfectant and something metallic. Blood? He stepped inside, scanning the area. Then he saw them. Footprints. Fresh, wet footprints leading deeper into the darkness. "Lisa!" he called, his voice barely above a whisper. No answer. The dragging sound returned, louder this time. It was coming from the corridor behind him. Mark spun around, his flashlight beam shaking as he searched for the source. The lights above him flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness. Then a whisper. Not from the radio. Not from the hallway. Right behind him. He turned just in time to see a figure standing in the corner. A doctor's coat hung loosely over its thin frame, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. Eyes black as night bore into Mark's soul. Before he could react, the thing lunged. Mark stumbled backward, crashing into the old surgical table. The creature moved unnaturally, its limbs bending at grotesque angles. It whispered something he couldn't understand. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. Mark bolted from the room, his breath ragged. He needed to find Lisa and get out of here. But when he reached the reception area, Lisa was already there, staring at him. Her eyes were vacant, her mouth slightly open as if trying to speak, but unable to form words. "Lisa, what happened?" She blinked slowly. Then, in a voice that was not her own, she whispered, "You were never supposed to leave." The hospital lights cut out completely. The last thing Mark saw was the shadow of something huge moving in the darkness. And then, the screaming began. I never believed in ghosts, demons, or anything supernatural. That changed after my first night shift at Ravenwood Storage Facility. I took the job because it was easy money. Sit in a small security office, monitor the cameras, and do a walkthrough once every 2 hours. Simple. No real threats, just an occasional raccoon or homeless guy trying to sneak into an empty unit. I was told the facility had been around since the 70s, and most of the units were filled with junk people had forgotten about. When I arrived for my shift at 11:45 p.m., the manager, a short, stocky guy named Gerald, handed me a set of keys and a clipboard. "Just follow the checklist," he said, "and whatever you do, don't go near Unit 224. I laughed, thinking it was some kind of initiation joke. Why? Some kind of haunted unit? Gerald's expression darkened. "Just don't. If you hear anything, ignore it. If you see anything on the cameras, switch feeds." I waited for him to laugh, but he didn't. He just turned and left. At midnight, I settled into the security office, sipping my coffee while watching the monitors. The facility was divided into 4 sections, A, B, C, and D. My job was to do a walkthrough of each section every 2 hours. 12:30 a.m., everything was quiet. The cameras showed empty corridors, long rows of metal doors illuminated by flickering fluorescent lights. I kicked my feet up on the desk, convinced this would be the easiest job I'd ever had. 1 a.m., time for my first patrol. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the cold night air. The storage facility stretched out in eerie silence. As I walked, my footsteps echoed against the concrete walls. Everything seemed normal, until I passed by Unit 224. I heard something inside, a faint scratching like nails against metal. I froze. Gerald's warning echoed in my mind. I took a step closer, pressing my ear to the cold steel door. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. Then, a whisper, a voice so quiet it could have been my imagination. But I swear I heard it say, "Help me." I stepped back fast, my heart hammering. I wanted to run back to the office, but curiosity held me in place. I reached out, fingers brushing the lock. A loud bang came from inside. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. The entire unit shuddered as if something massive had slammed against the door. I didn't wait to see if it happened again. I turned and sprinted back to the office, locking the door behind me. I sat there, trying to calm my breathing. Maybe it was an animal trapped inside, or maybe someone was living in the unit illegally. Yeah, that had to be it. 1:45 a.m. I stared at the monitors, but something was off. The feed for Section B, where Unit 224 was located, was static. I flipped through the other cameras. Everything else was fine, but Section B was completely blacked out. My walkie crackled. A voice came through, distorted, barely audible. Open door. Chills ran down my spine. I hadn't used the walkie all night. Then, something moved on the screen. Section B's camera flickered back on for a split second, and I saw it. A figure standing in front of Unit 224. It was tall and impossibly thin, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Long fingers drummed against the metal door, slow and deliberate. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the screen cut to static again. I couldn't breathe. 2 a.m., another patrol. I didn't want to go outside. Every instinct told me to stay put. But I had a job to do. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, every shadow feeling like it was reaching for me. I avoided Section B, taking the long way around. I told myself I'd check it on the next round. I just needed time to process what I had seen. 3 a.m. Final patrol. I couldn't avoid it any longer. My legs felt like lead as I approached Section B. The hallway stretched before me, the air heavy with something I couldn't explain. Unit 224's lock was missing. The door was slightly open. A single breath echoed from inside. Slow, deep. I raised my flashlight, my hands shaking. Who's in there? No answer. I pushed the door open a little more. The light barely cut through the darkness inside. The air smelled damp, stale. Then I saw it. A pair of eyes, black as coal, staring at me from the corner of the unit. The figure lunged. I barely managed to slam the door shut. Something pounded against the metal, the force rattling my teeth. I grabbed the lock from the ground and clicked it into place, my fingers barely working. Then silence. I staggered back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The pounding stopped. The air felt lighter, as if whatever was inside had given up. I didn't finish my shift. I left the keys on the desk, walked out, and never looked back. The next morning, Gerald called me. You saw it, didn't you? His voice was grim. I didn't answer. He sighed. That unit's been locked for 30 years. You're not the first to hear it, or see it. I swallowed hard. What's in there? A long pause, then something that never should have been let in. I hung up, packed my bags, and left town. Some things aren't meant to be understood. Some doors should never be opened, and some night shifts should never be taken. 9/11, night shift. The night shift at a 9/11 dispatch center is usually quiet, until it isn't. It was my third month on the job, and I was still getting used to the eerie silence that filled the small, dimly lit room between calls. The old fluorescent lights flickered above me, casting sickly pale glows onto my workstation. It was a little past 2:30 a.m. when the phone rang. 911, what's your emergency? I answered, my voice steady. At first, all I heard was static. Then, a whisper. Help me. He's in the house. A chill crawled down my spine. Ma'am, what's your location? I asked, my fingers already typing into the system. I don't know, she whispered, her voice trembling. It's so dark, I can't see anything. Do you know your address? Can you describe anything around you? The line crackled. Heavy breathing filled my ears. He's watching me. My blood ran cold. Who's watching you? Silence. Then a long, drawn-out creak, like a door slowly opening, and then the call disconnected. I tried calling back. No answer. I traced the number, but it came up as unknown. My screen flashed red, an error. The system couldn't find a location. I sat frozen, staring at the monitor, my heartbeat pounding against my ribs. Another prank call? Asked my coworker, Dave, leaning back in his chair, sipping coffee. I don't think so, I muttered. She sounded terrified. Happens sometimes, he shrugged. People messing around. Ghost calls? Ghost calls? I frowned. Yeah, weird ones. Calls from numbers that don't exist, locations that can't be traced. We get a handful every year. I didn't believe in ghosts, but something about this call felt real. Too real. At 3:10 a.m., another call came in. My stomach clenched when I saw it was from the same number. 911, what's your emergency? And I answered, my voice shaking slightly. Static again. Then, a whisper. He found me. The line went dead. I bolted upright. Did you hear that? I asked Dave, who was now staring at me, his face pale. Yeah, he muttered. I heard it. Then, the phone rang again. This time the number read 000-000-0000. I hesitated before answering. 911, what's your emergency? A deep, guttural voice came through. Why did you ignore her? My breath caught in my throat. Who is this? The voice chuckled, a slow, sinister sound that sent ice through my veins. You should have helped her. Now it's too late. Click. The line went dead again. I turned to Dave. Call the police. Now. He grabbed the radio, but as he did, the power in the dispatch room flickered. The monitors flashed static, and then a photo appeared on my screen. It was a grainy, black and white image of a woman. Her face was twisted in terror, her mouth open in a silent scream. Behind her, a shadowy figure loomed, eyes glowing in the dark. Then, the lights went out completely. The room was pitch black. The only sound was our own breathing, and then a whisper. Right behind me. He's here. The lights flickered back on. The screens were normal. The phone lines silent. But on my screen, one message remained typed into the dispatch system. You can't save her. We quit the next day. No one ever traced the call, and no one ever found the woman. Night shift. The 911 horror call. The Hamilton County 911. Call center was always unsettling at night. The sterile glow of the monitors, the low hum of machines, the quiet murmurs of dispatchers handling routine emergencies. It was a strange mix of tension and monotony. Dispatcher Ethan Carter had worked the night shift for almost 4 years, and though he'd heard his share of disturbing calls, break-ins, domestic violence, even a murder once, something about tonight felt wrong. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, lurking just beyond the edges of his vision. At 2:37 a.m., the phone rang. Ethan straightened, adjusting his headset before answering. 911, what's your emergency? For a moment, all he heard was breathing. Software ragged. Afraid. Then a child's whisper. He's inside. Ethan's pulse quickened. He had dealt with panicked children before, but this whisper carried something different. A weight. A terror that felt contagious. Who's inside, sweetheart? Are you safe? The child's breath hitched. He's watching me. Ethan typed into his system, trying to trace the call. Nothing, no number, no location. A ghost call. What's your name? He asked, keeping his voice gentle. Lily, she whispered. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. Lily, where are your parents? A long silence. Then, another voice. Deep, guttural. So close to the receiver that Ethan could hear the wet click of lips parting. She shouldn't have called. Click. The line went dead. Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He tried to reconnect. Nothing. The number was untraceable. Like the call had never happened. He stared at his screen, waiting, hoping for the number to reappear. Instead, the office lights flickered. The monitors glitched. His computer screen went black for 2 full seconds before flashing back on. A chill ran down his spine. Then, another call. Same number. Ethan swallowed hard and answered, Lily. Silence. Then, that same slow, heavy breathing, and a whisper. You should have let it go. The lights cut out completely. Ethan shot up from his chair, heart pounding. The only light in the room came from the glow of his monitors, casting long, warped shadows against the walls. The other dispatchers, who had been there moments ago, were gone. Their desks sat empty, headsets abandoned. A faint creak echoed through the room. Ethan turned, eyes darting to the glass partition behind him. A shadow stood there, tall, motionless, watching. The emergency backup lights flickered on, washing the room in a sickly red glow. Ethan grabbed his radio. "This is Dispatcher Carter. I need an officer at the call center immediately. I have..." The line went dead. A sharp, sudden knock came from the glass. Ethan turned, but there was no one there. His computer screen flashed again. The call logs refreshed. He scanned them frantically. No record of the call at 2:37 a.m. But then, a single new entry appeared. Caller Lily Henderson. Status: deceased date of death: October 13th, 1998. Ethan's blood ran cold. That was 25 years ago. Then the cursor on his screen moved on its own, typing out a final message. "See you tonight." The lights shut off again, and somewhere in the darkness, he heard a breath right behind him. Drivers, the occasional break-in, maybe a domestic dispute. Nothing like the chaos of big cities. Dispatcher Ryan Dawson had been working the night shift for 3 years. He liked the quiet, the stillness, but tonight felt different. The air was heavy, stale, like a storm was about to hit. His coffee had gone cold, untouched. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, flickering every now and then. Then, at 3:12 a.m., the phone rang. Ryan adjusted his headset. 911, what's your emergency? Static. Then, a woman's voice barely above a whisper. Help me. Ryan's fingers tensed over his keyboard. Ma'am, what's your location? A pause, then a strange wet gurgling sound. Ryan sat up straight. Are you hurt? Is someone in the house with you? A choked sob. Then in a trembling voice, he won't let me leave. Ryan's stomach twisted. Who? Who won't let you leave? More static. Then, a deep rattling breath that wasn't the woman's. Click. The line went dead. Ryan's screen flashed. Call untraceable. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. Ghost calls weren't unheard of. Sometimes old signals bounced back, triggering false alarms. But this one felt real. Then, another call. Same number. Ryan swallowed hard and answered, This is 911. Are you there? Silence. Then, a whisper so quiet he almost didn't hear it. He's looking at you. Ryan's skin prickled. A cold draft brushed against his neck, like someone was breathing right behind him. He turned sharply. No one. His heart pounded as he scanned the dimly lit room. The other dispatchers were gone. The chairs sat empty. The only sound was the hum of the computers. Then, a scraping noise. Ryan's monitor flickered. His call log refreshed. A new entry appeared. Caller: Claire Donovan. Status: deceased date of death: October 31st, 1976. Ryan felt the blood drain from his face. That name, he knew that name. Claire Donovan had been a missing persons case from nearly 50 years ago. A local woman last seen running barefoot down a highway screaming for help. By the time police arrived, she was gone. Her body was never found. Ryan's hands trembled as his screen glitched again. The text began typing on its own. He's behind you. Ryan froze. The lights cut out. And in the reflection of his monitor, he saw a tall, twisted figure standing right behind him. Then the line went dead. The 911 caller, who knew my name. The night shift at Brookhaven County 911 dispatch was usually slow. Calls about drunk drivers, the occasional domestic dispute, and the rare fire alarm. That was it. But there was something about 3 a.m. that always felt wrong. Dispatcher Daniel Reeves had been working the shift for 5 years, and he had learned to ignore the weird feelings that came with the late hours. The eerie silence, the way the security cameras flickered sometimes, or the occasional ghost call, those untraceable calls that came in with nothing but static. He told himself it was just part of the job. Until tonight. At 3:08 a.m., the phone rang. Daniel adjusted his headset. 911, what's your emergency? Silence. Then a voice he didn't recognize. Low, gravelly, like someone trying to suppress a laugh. Hey, Danny, miss me? Daniel's stomach twisted. Who is this? The voice chuckled. You already know. Daniel's fingers hovered over his keyboard. The system showed no number, no location. Just a blank screen where the caller ID should be. Listen, if this is a prank, I'm hanging up. The voice went quiet for a moment. Then, in a whisper, "It's not a prank. You left me there." Daniel's breath caught. His hands started to sweat, because suddenly he knew exactly who the voice sounded like. Jason Miller, his old partner, the one who died 2 years ago. A car accident on a back road. Daniel had been in the passenger seat. When they crashed, Jason had been pinned under the wreckage. And Daniel had left him. He told himself there was nothing he could do. The flames had been too high, the wreck too unstable. He had barely made it out himself, but he still heard Jason's screams in his dreams. And now, his voice was on the other end of the line. Daniel's throat went dry. This isn't real." The voice chuckled again. "Are you sure?" The call cut out. Daniel yanked off his headset, his hands shaking. His screen glitched. The cursor moved on its own, opening an old case file. Jason Miller, deceased, February 10th, 2023. Today's date was February 10th, 2025. 2 years to the day. A new line of text appeared under Jason's name. "You didn't even try." Daniel's breath came in short gasps. His office felt colder. Then, the phone rang again. Same blank screen. His hand hovered over the answer button. But before he could press it, a voice whispered directly behind him. "I'm not done with you yet." The lights flickered, the monitors went black, and Daniel knew he wasn't alone anymore. Asen Carter had worked the night shift at the Hollowbrook Medical Supply Warehouse for nearly 3 years. It was a monotonous job, checking inventory, restocking shelves, and making sure deliveries were ready for the morning shift. But it was quiet, and Jason liked quiet. Tonight, however, the air felt different. The warehouse was cavernous, the high ceilings swallowing any noise. The flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting eerie shadows against the endless rows of shelves. Jason adjusted his name badge, trying to shake the unsettling feeling crawling up his spine. At exactly 2:37 a.m., the intercom crackled to life. A burst of static filled the air, followed by a faint voice. "Help! Me!" The voice was barely a whisper, distorted and distant. Jason froze, his hand tightening around the box cutter in his pocket. He glanced at the security monitors. Nothing. Just endless aisles of shelves and empty corridors. Probably a radio interference, he told himself. As he resumed his work, a loud clang echoed from the far side of the warehouse. Jason spun around, his pulse hammering in his throat. He grabbed his flashlight and moved cautiously toward the source of the noise. A metal shelf had collapsed, scattering boxes across the concrete floor. But there was something else. Deep scratches ran along the steel frame, as though something with claws had raked against it. Jason's breath hitched. "What the hell?" A sudden scraping noise made him whirl around. The shadows between the shelves seemed to shift, stretching unnaturally. His flashlight beam flickered. That's when he saw it, just for a second. A figure darting between the shelves. Too tall, too thin, limbs bent at odd angles. Jason's stomach turned to ice. The intercom crackled again. "Help! Basement! Please!" There was no basement in the warehouse. Jason backed away, his breathing ragged. He needed to get out. Now. But as he turned, a low, guttural growl echoed from the darkness. Then, the lights went out. Pitch black. Jason fumbled for his phone, the small screen illuminating his trembling fingers. He sprinted toward the exit, but the sound of rapid footsteps followed him. He didn't dare look back. Reaching the security office, he slammed the door shut, locking it behind him. His hands were shaking as he pulled up the security feed. The cameras flickered with static. Then, one by one, they went black, except for camera 5. It showed the main aisle. A tall, twisted figure stood beneath the flickering light. Its head jerked in unnatural movements, its empty eyes staring straight into the camera. And then, it turned its head toward the security office. Jason's screen cut to static. The doorknob behind him rattled. And then, silence. The next morning, when the day shift arrived, Jason was gone. His locker was untouched, his car still in the parking lot. The security footage was corrupted, the tapes filled with nothing but static. The only thing left behind was a single message scrawled on the security office wall in deep, jagged scratches. Not alone. Ethan Wells had never been afraid of working the night shift at the old Meridian Research Facility. It was a dull job, monitoring security cameras, checking doors, and occasionally escorting late-night researchers to their cars. The quiet suited him. But tonight, the silence felt wrong. The halls stretched endlessly under the dim emergency lighting. The air carried a metallic tang, and every sound echoed like a whisper from something unseen. Ethan adjusted his utility belt, swallowing the unease creeping up his spine. At 3:12 a.m., a garbled voice crackled through the radio on his hip. "Ethan, down here." His grip tightened around the radio. "Who is this?" "Identify yourself." Silence. A thud reverberated through the facility, originating from the east wing. Ethan hesitated before heading toward the noise, flashlight in hand. His boots echoed against the linoleum floor as he approached the corridor. A supply cabinet had toppled over, scattering papers and equipment. But something was off. Long, jagged gashes marred the walls, too deep to be accidental. His breath hitched. What could have done this? A faint rustling came from the ceiling vents. Ethan swung his flashlight upward, his pulse quickening. For a brief second, something moved, something elongated and skeletal, slithering out of sight. His stomach churned. The radio sputtered again. "Basement! Now! Please!" There was no basement. Ethan took a step back, heart hammering. A low, guttural clicking sound echoed from the corridor. The lights flickered, then cut out entirely. Darkness swallowed the facility. He reached for his phone, its small screen barely illuminating the suffocating blackness. Footsteps, rapid, unnatural, echoed behind him. He ran. Reaching the security office, he slammed the door and locked it. He pulled up the camera feeds. One by one, they failed, except for camera 4. A grotesque figure stood motionless under the emergency light. Its limbs twitched, head jerking unnaturally as it turned toward the camera. Its hollow eyes locked onto him. And then, the screen cut to static. The doorknob rattled. Silence. Ethan's breathing grew uneven as a slow, deliberate scratching noise dragged along the metal door. He backed away, clutching the radio. "Whoever's out there, I have backup on the way," he lied, his voice barely steady. The scratching stopped. Then a whisper seeped through the door's crack. "No, you don't!" Cold dread seized Ethan. He grabbed his baton and pressed himself against the wall. The security panel flickered, the static-filled screen momentarily revealing the figure standing right outside the door. Then, the power surged, and everything went dark again. A sudden pressure squeezed Ethan's chest. An invisible force gripped him, pushing the air from his lungs. He gasped, clawing at his throat, as unseen hands dragged him toward the door. His vision blurred. The last thing he saw was the faint reflection of hollow eyes staring back at him in the dark glass. When the morning shift arrived, Ethan was gone. His belongings remained untouched, his car still in the lot. The security footage was corrupted, filled with static and bursts of distorted images. The only trace left behind was a single message scratched deep into the security office wall. "Still here." 2 nights later, a new guard named Marcus replaced Ethan. His first shift went quietly, until 3:12 a.m. The radio crackled. "Marcus, down here." The last call, 911. Operator. 911, what's your emergency? A ragged breath crackled through the receiver. The voice on the other end trembled. "There's someone in my house." Operator Sarah Carter straightened in her chair, fingers poised over the keyboard. "Can you confirm your address, ma'am?" The woman whispered an address. "Please." "He's upstairs. I can hear him breathing." Sarah's stomach tightened. "Stay calm. Where are you right now?" "In the closet, in my bedroom. I locked the door." Sarah nodded, signaling the dispatch team. "Officers are on their way. Do you have any weapons with you?" "No, just my phone." A faint creak echoed through the call, followed by a muffled sob. Sarah's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Ma'am, are you still there? He's in the hallway, so right outside my room. Sarah swallowed hard. Stay as quiet as you can. Help is coming. A pause. Then the woman's breath quickened. Oh God, he's whispering my name. How does he know my name? Sarah's pulse pounded. Do not move. Do not respond. Just stay hidden. The call crackled. Heavy footsteps thudded against the floor. The woman whimpered. He's trying the door. Sarah's voice remained steady. Police are 2 minutes away. Hold on. The line went silent. Ma'am, are you still with me? A deep inhale on the other end. Then, a slow, raspy voice. She's not here anymore. Sarah froze. The breath in her lungs turned to ice. Who is this? The call disconnected. Minutes later, the officers arrived. They found the house empty. No signs of forced entry. No signs of struggle. Just a single phone on the closet floor. And a message scratched into the wood. Still listening. Thanks for watching.